This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
China reports 6 coronavirus cases in Beijing traced to a wholesale food market. WHO raises alarm as coronavirus cases in Africa rise by 31% in just 1 week. And US President still believes there is no systemic racism in the American police departments. Hello and welcome to Africa Live here on CGTN with me, Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Welcome to the program. Also coming up, bartenders in Ghana struggle to make ends meet as bars and nightclubs remain closed. And in sports, top-tier football in Tanzania set to resume Saturday after an eight-week hiatus. Well, let's begin in China, which has reported 8 new domestic coronavirus cases on Friday. 6 are in Beijing and 2 asymptomatic cases in Liaoning province in the northeast. All Beijing infections have been traced to a wholesale food market. The 2 other cases had close contact with one of the confirmed cases in the capital. This marks the 2nd consecutive day of new infections in Beijing after almost 2 months without a case. All the patients have either worked or shopped at the Xinfadi food market in the city's southwest Fengtai district. Throat swab results for 45 of the market's workers came back positive, with 1 more at a second market also testing positive. Officials say the coronavirus was found on a chopping board used for handling imported salmon. The salmon was supplied from another seafood market in Beijing. Both of the markets have been shut down and the city plans to test 10,000 people at Xinfadi. Major supermarkets in Beijing are suspending sales of salmon. The city has also tightened prevention and control measures, including inspecting catering services and food markets, as well as strengthening inspection for import cargo and commodities. Our reporter Sui Hui Kao has more details.
One local CDC official says that these patients might have been exposed to a contaminated environment or interacted with infected people at the market. Now, the market has been completely shut down and separate areas were designated to trade fruit and vegetables. That is to ensure the supply, as 90% of the fruit and vegetables in Beijing are supplied by this market. And meanwhile, authorities are working to trace the origin, and those who have come in close contact in the area have been put under quarantine. Now, we know the capital city had over 50 days of 0 locally transmitted cases, and the latest development has sounded alarm that this is going to be a long-term battle, and it has triggered some new prevention and control measures. For instance, 11 communities in Fengtai have been closed off since last night. Authorities started a major campaign examining key places that sell meat and seafood products. Let's take a listen what they have found.
Beijing carried out major inspections on wholesale markets and large supermarkets, collecting a total of 5,424 smear test samples from seafood, meat, and the external environment. Nucleic acid testing results showed 40 environmental positive samples from Xinfadi wholesale market. The remaining samples from other wholesale and supermarkets all tested negative.
And in response to the new infections, education authorities are suspending plans to reopen schools. Now, 1st to 3rd graders were among the last batch to resume classes, which was meant to happen next Monday. And now the suspension is going to affect around 520,000 students. All sports games are suspended as well. Now, local authorities warned that this is going to be a long battle with the virus, and they warn local residents to stay vigilant, including using measures such as wearing masks, washing hands, and keeping social distancing. So the stakes are very high.
Well, here in Africa, there are more than 220,000 coronavirus cases recorded, with more than 100,000 recoveries. Reports show that 10 African countries account for more than 75% of the cases on the continent. Here's a look at the cases by region. On to the north, where Egypt has recorded more than 1,500 new cases in the last 24 hours. The North African country accounts for 2 out of 3 cases in the region. In West Africa, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has urged the country to continue following anti-epidemic measures to help flatten the infection curve. Buhari said the government will create thousands of jobs to counter the economic impact of the pandemic. Nigeria has the highest number of infections in the region. In East Africa, the hardest hit countries are Sudan, Djibouti and Kenya. Meanwhile, Rwanda has begun mass testing of its peacekeepers in South Sudan. UN peacekeepers are among those at risk of infection as they help people in conflict-affected communities. In Central Africa, the head of a local task force fighting COVID-19 in the eastern DRC has resigned. He cites frustration at the government's response to the crisis. The DRC has the second highest number of infections in the region after Cameroon. And in the Southern Africa region, South Africa has become the first African country to conduct over 1 million tests for COVID-19. That is according to data from the country's health ministry. South Africa is the worst hit on the continent with more than 61,000 confirmed infections. Well, for more on this, we now have with us Dr. Mary Stevens, the Technical Officer of the World Health Organization Regional Office for Africa. She joins us live from Brazzaville. Dr. Stevens, the WHO says nearly 31% spike in coronavirus positive cases in Africa. They are reporting that in just 1 week. Could this be just about more aggressive testing, or could there be other reasons for this spike?
Good morning and thanks for having me. Yes, the situation in Africa continues to evolve, and we are seeing increasing number of cases, mainly from 10 countries, which account for over 80% of these cases. Yes, increasing, of course, doing laboratory testing in the community might help to detect additional cases. But also these countries where the cases are being reported are the countries where we have the highest number of cases. And if you recall, at the beginning of the outbreak, sometime in March, countries started implementing these travel restrictions and lockdown measures, which limited the movement of people. But since April, we have seen the continuous phase easing of this lockdown, which might also contribute to exposure of additional people, especially if people are not adhering to the preventive measures of ensuring that we maintain at least 1 meter distance when we are in the public, wearing of the non-medical face masks, the issue of hand washing and observing respiratory etiquette. This could contribute, because what the lockdown has done, as we have seen from other parts of the world, is that it helps to reduce the reproductive rate of the virus. So from the beginning, before any interventions or any implementation of these measures that restrict the movement of people, we had about 2.3 reproductive rate. So it means that one person can infect at least 2 to 3 people. But with the implementation of movement restrictions, that figure is usually reduced to 1 or less than 1. So just imagine a country where you have about 1,000 cases, for instance, active cases. So it means that if those measures are not being observed, I mean the preventive measures, the tendency that one person can infect more than one is very, very high. So this could also might have contributed to the additional number of cases that we are seeing, especially from these 10 countries.
Now, Dr. Stevens, most nations on the continent started reporting cases more than 3 months ago now. How and when do we determine which ones will see a peak in infections?
Yes, so in Africa, we are the last continent to start having the importation of COVID cases. Our first case was reported in Egypt on February 14, 2020. And like we said earlier, the outbreak continues to evolve on the continent. So if you put all the countries together, you will see a continuous daily increase in number of cases. So this shows that we haven't seen the peak yet on the continent, and so we need to make sure that we are implementing all the public health measures of dictation, testing, isolation, contact tracing, and treatment of the sick people, including the preventive measures observed by the general population, in a sustained manner, because in Africa we are not there yet. We still have a long way to go as it relates to this outbreak, and so we have to make sure that we implement these measures in a sustained manner. Yes, we know we have some countries that have already flattened the curve. Some countries have not reported cases in a long while, but together we need to make sure that all these public health measures are implemented in a very sustained and aggressive way, including, of course, decentralizing and making sure that we have capacities at the lower levels of the health system to detect, treat, and manage these cases.
And finally, there is also this puzzle of some nations having high numbers of positive coronavirus cases, but with a low or no death toll. Are we now at a point where we can now explain any of this?
So the issue of deaths, if you look at the continent as a whole, Africa is reporting the least number of deaths. So there are some issues that contribute to this low number of deaths. So if you look at the statistics of COVID, 80% will present with mild symptoms, and then you have 15% presenting with severe symptoms and 5% presenting with critical illness. So it means you have 15 plus 5, 20% of the population that will present with some form of more severe disease that will require admissions. And these are the same set of people that you will have the potential of people dying from this group of people. So in Africa, two major things. One is the fact that because we know that age is one of the risk factors that reduces that reduces one's chance of survival or increases the risk of mortality, and then the issue of comorbidities. We have mostly in the African continent, we have lower age group. The population is a very young population as compared to what you find in Europe or any part of the world. Secondly, the comorbidities, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, chronic respiratory diseases, that contribute significantly to the individual's chances of dying from this COVID. If you look at the statistics, the prevalence of what we have on the continent and comparing it to what you have elsewhere in the Western world, Africa still has a sort of lower prevalence from these non-communicable diseases as well. So these are some of the factors that contribute to the lower number of deaths we are seeing on the continent.
All right, thank you very much for your insights there, Technical Officer Dr. Mary Stevens with the WHO Regional Office for Africa, joining us live there from Brazzaville. Let's turn to Zimbabwe now, where President Emmerson Mnangagwa has once again expressed gratitude to China for helping the country in its fight against COVID-19. In a live national televised broadcast, Mnangagwa hailed China for its continuous support. China has delivered 2 batches of anti-COVID-19 supplies to the African country. They include thousands of surgical masks, testing kits, and personal protective equipment. Last month, China deployed 12 medical experts to Zimbabwe for a 2-week program. The team shared their experience with their counterparts in Zimbabwe. They also offered prevention and treatment guidance to the local health workers.
Zimbabwe is grateful for the support we continue to receive in our fight against the pandemic from both internal institutions and organizations, as well as from external governments, institutions and other development partners. I'm happy to announce that we have once again received a considerable consignment of PPEs and other materials from the People's Republic of China. We remain grateful to His Excellency President Xi Jinping and the government and the people of China for their solidarity and support.
On to the United States, where the divide over race continues to remain front and center. U.S. President Donald Trump is not backing down from some of his views, including where he stands on systemic racism in law enforcement. Our White House correspondent Nathan King reports.
The U.S. president spending the weekend at his New Jersey Bedminster estate, but still doubling down on his view that there isn't systemic racism in U.S. police departments, and while he's open to reform, it's not the sort of reform that Democrats and others are pushing for.
We are going to do lots of, I think, good things, but we also have to keep our police and our law enforcement strong. They have to do it right. They have to be trained in a proper manner. They have to do it right. Again, the sad thing is that they are very professional.
The political finger-pointing continues too, with the US president criticising what's being dubbed by protesters an autonomous zone in the city of Seattle in Washington state. Around 6 blocks around the city's capital, Capitol Hill neighborhood, has had no police there for several days. They're offering free medical treatment, free food, and the US president suggesting that he may need to move in there, suggesting perhaps even force. The city's mayor is rejecting his interference.
Demanding we do better as a society and providing true equity for communities of color is not terrorism. It is patriotism. The right to challenge authority and government is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
Meanwhile, several cities, states and municipalities are moving forward with their reform. In New York, the governor, Andrew Cuomo, announcing there will be no more chokeholds that killed George Floyd, but also Eric Garner in that city several years ago, and that secrecy when it comes to police records and abuse will be no longer. In Louisville, Kentucky, also, there will be no more no-knock drug busts where you don't need a warrant. A black woman was killed there when police apparently got the wrong house. Other municipalities moving forward, not least Minneapolis, of course, in Minnesota, where George Floyd died. A lot of states, a lot of cities are now saying that Black Lives Matter, and they are moving forward. Defunding the police and the debate here in Washington is really behind the national conversation. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
And after criticizing the WHO, the U.S. president is now taking aim at the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. The president has approved economic and travel sanctions against ICC staff who are investigating whether American forces committed war crimes in Afghanistan. And as Jim Spellman reports, there have been international expressions of concern, including from the UN.
President Trump has authorized sanctions and visa restrictions for International Criminal Court personnel and their families. The U.S. initially signed on to the International Criminal Court almost 20 years ago, but it's never been ratified, and multiple U.S. presidents have objected to the court, saying it threatens U.S. sovereignty, that the U.S. Constitution only allows for the United States Supreme Court to be the top judicial body. They say that, that soldiers, other U.S. personnel wouldn't get fair due process in the International Criminal Court, and they prefer to have any evidence turned over for the U.S. judicial system to pursue any cases. President Trump angry especially at an investigation into alleged war crimes and atrocities committed by U.S. soldiers, CIA personnel, and U.S. contractors in Afghanistan. The UN says they're very concerned about this move. Listen.
We've taken note with concern of these reports of the executive order authorizing sanctions against certain individuals at the International Criminal Court. I'll add that we're also aware that there have been previous statements by the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, that any restrictions taken against individuals would be implemented consistently with the host country's obligations under the UN headquarters agreement. We'll obviously continue to follow very closely any developments on this issue.
And we're getting other reactions. Well, the International Criminal Court releasing a statement that says, in part, an attack on the ICC also represents an attack against the interests of victims of atrocity crimes, for many of whom the court represents the last hope for justice. The EU is calling it a matter of great concern. Palestinian leaders saying this: the U.S. sanctions against ICC officials aim to protect war criminals and the leaders of the Israeli occupation. Just another example of President Trump withdrawing from multilateral global institutions, preferring to go it alone.
You're watching CGTN. It's time for us to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. There's plenty more still to come here on Africa Live.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Now, a top administrative court in France has ruled that a researcher can access former President François Mitterrand's archives on the 1994 Rwandan genocide. The ruling marks a further step to ease tensions between Paris and Kigali. Researchers complain that only a fraction of classified French documents have surfaced. They say a conclusive account on France's role in the genocide has yet to be produced. The researcher will now be able to access notes from the president's advisors and minutes of government meetings of the former French president. Rwanda has long accused France of complicity in the genocide, where 800,000 people were killed. Paris has repeatedly dismissed the accusations. Now, the International Criminal Court has welcomed the arrest of a Sudanese militia leader after he spent 13 years on the run. Ali Kushaib has been wanted since 2007. He's accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Darfur between 2003 and 2004.
Accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the former Darfur militia leader Ali Kushaib is said to have surrendered himself voluntarily in the northern town of Birao in the Central African Republic. According to the International Criminal Court, he was flown to the Netherlands on Tuesday. ICC Chief Prosecutor Fatou Bensouda described the arrest as a pivotal moment.
I hope that the suspect's transfer to the court also sends a clear and unequivocal message that no matter how long it takes or the obstacles placed in our path, my office will not stop until the alleged perpetrators of Rome Statute crimes are brought to justice.
Kushaib, a commander of the pro-government Popular Defense Forces, is accused of leading attacks on towns and villages during the Darfur conflict that killed hundreds of thousands of people and drove more than 2 million from their homes. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Kushaib in 2007, accusing him of murder, rape and pillage in the western Sudanese region of Darfur between 2003 and 2004.
I remain hopeful that a new chapter of constructive ICC Sudan engagement, rooted in mutual respect and a genuine commitment to bringing justice for the victims of heinous crimes committed in Darfur, may be on the horizon.
Kushaib is one of 6 men wanted by the ICC for crimes in Darfur. The list of suspects includes former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who was ousted by the military in 2019 after months of protests against his rule. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Bashir in 2008, accusing him of war crimes, genocide and crimes against humanity. He was sentenced to 2 years in detention by a court in Sudan in December last year. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
The United Nations Refugee Agency has raised alarm over escalating violence in Africa's Sahel region. UNHCR says insecurity has triggered displacement and is hindering humanitarian efforts. Attacks by armed groups and counter-security operations have forced people from their homes and put pressure on some host communities. The UN body reports that people are being displaced repeatedly as a result of multiple strikes. COVID-19 prevention measures have also slowed down attempts by relief agencies to reach remote parts of Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali. Now, at the same time, the head of the UN Regional Office for Central Africa is calling for action on persistent armed conflicts. He says insecurity is undermining efforts to tackle COVID-19. The UN official warns that a resulting economic crisis is unfolding across the region.
The slowdown in economic activities due to COVID-19 deprives states of the resources they need to address the social-economic impact of the pandemic, with the risk of creating social unrest, as governments are forced to choose between urgent public health expenditures and other priorities. They risk lacking the resources needed for the smooth functioning of national institutions and the financing of crucial reforms.
Now in Egypt, a robot to serve COVID-19 quarantine hospitals has been created by a university student. The wireless control tray aims to decrease contact between medical staff and patients to decrease infection. The University of Mansoura is set to start production this week.
Despite his core study in business, Muhammad Abdurrahman's passion has been electronics. After COVID-19's widespread in Egypt, he went to the president of Mansoura University, offering several ideas to help out under the pandemic. Muhammad's prototype is a wirelessly controlled robotic tray.
The president of Mansoura University prioritized the project because of the rising deaths reported among medical staff. He instructed me to implement it immediately. The design took me 1 week, and the building took me a month. It could have been completed earlier, but because of the flights ban, many parts needed got delayed in shipment.
The robot is equipped with a camera, mic and speakers for an audio-visual interaction between the operator and patients. With the capacity to lift up to 200 kilograms, it can carry food and medicine to patients for 6 straight hours, saving medical staff interaction with patients to essential healthcare follow-ups.
I will be happy once I see the robot operating in hospitals. But as long as I'm in the media phase, taking pictures next to it, I won't be satisfied. There is a cooperation ongoing with the Faculty of Engineering. Starting this week, a team of the best students will start assembling many robots immediately. The team will be trained to do maintenance and give technical support.
This team is assigned to start with producing 25 robots within the next 2 weeks. Since middle school, Muhammad's passion has been building robots. His previous inventions have earned him awards from the National Academy for Scientific Research and the Military Technical College. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Let's get you a recap of our top stories at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump is still doubling down on his view that there is no systemic racism in U.S. police departments, even as the divide over racism remains a thorny issue across the country. Meanwhile, the New York governor has signed a major police reform legislation. China has reported 8 new domestic coronavirus cases on Friday. 6 are in Beijing and 2 asymptomatic cases in Liaoning province in the northeast. All Beijing infections have been traced to a wholesale food market. The 2 other cases had close contact with one of the confirmed cases in the capital. This marks the second consecutive day of new infections in Beijing after almost 2 months without a case. All the patients have either worked or shopped at the Xinfadi food market in the southwest Fengtai district. Throat swab results for 45 of the market workers came back positive. And the UN Refugee Agency has raised an alarm over escalating violence in Africa's Sahel region. UNHCR says insecurity has triggered displacement and is hindering humanitarian efforts. Attacks by armed groups and counter-security operations have forced people from their homes and put pressure on some host communities. Those are some of our top stories at this hour. And here's what's coming up in the business. We take a look at Kenya's new budget along with some controversial tax plans. And bartenders in Ghana struggle to make ends meet as bars and nightclubs remain shut. The ongoing protests have pushed COVID-19 off the front page in the United States, but the numbers are still spiking in many states. Both issues are likely to be critical factors in November's presidential election. CGTN's Sean Caleb's reports from Ohio on what's at stake.
The Avroblay Butcher Shop in the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati has been at this more than 125 years. That means Len Blay's grandfather, who first opened the store, weathered the pandemic that swept through at the end of World War I.
We do all of our production back here. We make all of our sausage back here. We do all the hams, all the lunch meats.
Blay says the early days of COVID-19 in 2020 were indeed spooky, not knowing what to expect.
It was like you step outside and it's like you look around to make sure nobody's coming near you. They tell you to keep 6-foot distance, you know.
Oddly, while many shops, stores, and restaurants saw profits cut to the bone, Blay says people wanted their steaks, pork, and chicken.
So people were buying things like a lot more than they ever buying before. So it seemed kind of crazy. And when you expect normal business and all of a sudden things double and triple.
That's not to say there weren't big changes. Customers can't come inside. Orders are placed over the phone and then picked up outside.
Thank you, John. See you later.
Thank you.
Yep, that's it.
All right. Thank you, sir. Take care now.
And prices to Blay spiked. Brisket and other cuts more than doubled in cost. Blay has muscled through and hopes business is slowly returning to normal.
Slowly, this historic neighborhood is showing signs of economic life as the stores and shops begin to reopen and slowly customers begin to return. But the question remains, is it too much too soon? And to what degree will the response to COVID-19 become a critical issue in the November election?
Means Cameron opened his shop, the Black Coffee Lounge, 10 months ago. 5 of his family members caught COVID-19, including a grandfather who passed away. And he warns this is not over.
And we haven't paid much attention to what COVID is doing because of what's going on around police brutality. but the numbers are still really bad. And we still need to figure out what to do as a community to keep people safe.
Cameron says he's not worried about having to close his coffee shop, at least not now. A non-profit entity called 3CDC began developing over the Rhine 15 years ago, when some of these old buildings were in danger of collapse, and this was the most violent neighborhood in Ohio. It's helping shop owners through COVID-19, providing $900,000 in rent relief alone.
Trying to find a new tenant and replace that is going to take an awful lot more time, effort, energy, and money, and it's also going to change the fabric of the neighborhood.
Cameron is among the many who appreciate the local support, and while the response to COVID-19 is being debated, there's no question the explosive race relations issue has struck a nerve and joins the White House COVID response as a hot political topic.
For black people, we're fed up. We're not happy about how we're treated in our own country.
Every person that is out here that is angry, please vote in November.
It shouldn't take for these things to happen for us to think of one another.
Whether the issue is COVID or civil rights, Cameron hopes people take their passion from the streets to the voting booths, where Ohio is always one of the most hotly contested states in the national election.
For those people, those politicians who don't value black lives, it's time for them to go.
Sean Caleb's, CGTN, Cincinnati, Ohio.
South Africa's property market is on the rebound after being halted during level 5 of the lockdown. Deals slowed down significantly with restrictions while the country tried to come to grips with COVID-19. As commission earners, estate agents have had no help from the government, but they're starting to pick up the pieces. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
The first 6 weeks of South Africa's lockdown was a trying time for the real estate sector. Homes could not be bought or sold, and rental deals were all placed on hold.
We weren't allowed to take people out to go and have a look at properties, and it was only from the 8th of May when people were actually allowed to move. To not earn income for 6-8 weeks was quite devastating. So we are very happy to be back at work. In that time that we were in the hard lockdown, we weren't able to hand over any properties that had been signed from before the lockdown.
Estate agents stayed in contact with prospective clients from home via phone and emails. Leapfrog's Tanya Naidu managed to ink a virtual contract before restrictions were eased.
We'd send them just videos and say, this is what the property is. We'd go through what the spaces looks like. And I actually had closed the deal. We did it via a video chat with the principal of the company. So it was a 3-way chat. And yeah, it was great. We actually did that.
As the market picks up, big spenders are holding back. The first-time buyers on the hunt for bargains are taking advantage of interest rates at almost 50-year lows.
The areas that I deal with is not far from the townships. A lot of them are coming from there, and that's exciting for me. I'm getting calls and I'm saying, but some of the people are saying, my house is small. I can't do everything I need to do. I need to, cook. I need to work. I need to make sure the kids are seen to, as in homeschooling. I need a better space. The kids need to run around.
COVID-19 has, however, changed the business environment. Virtual showrooms are becoming more popular and viewing procedures have been tightened.
There's a procedure form that we send through before we take them out to view. That's basically shows what the procedure needs to be at the viewing. So no touching of surfaces, move through as quickly as possible, sort of one person at a time, and to make the viewing sort of as quick as possible without sort of detracting from their experience.
Despite the lockdown, property still remains a viable investment in South Africa, but a recovery depends on how quickly restrictions are lifted. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now in Kenya, Treasury Secretary Ukur Yatani presented his $25 billion budget for the year starting July the 1st. All eyes were on Yatani's first budget and how he would balance the state's financial plan against shrinking revenues, closing businesses, job losses, and declining exports. Here are some of the highlights. This budget includes a stimulus package to jumpstart the economy. It also proposed further removal of tax exemptions. Yatani imposed a 1% minimum tax on revenues for all companies, targeting firms that repeatedly declare losses to run away from taxes. Also, online transactions will now attract a 1.5% digital tax as the government goes after growing e-commerce in the country. Kenya will turn largely to local loans to fund its budget deficit. Yatani said the government is now targeting a fiscal deficit of 8.3% of GDP in the financial year 2019-2020 from the previous figure of 6.3%. Now in Ghana, social and religious gatherings of up to 100 people are now allowed, with hotels and restaurants operating under new safety measures. However, bars, pubs and nightclubs still remain firmly closed. From Accra, here is CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai exploring how bartenders are struggling to make up for lost tips.
Since the outbreak of the coronavirus in Ghana, David Nyamiche's job as a bartender has been badly hit.
It's been very, very frustrating because no one saw this coming, as in the length of how it will last for.
The government has relaxed restrictions after 3 months of lockdown, but bars, nightclubs and pubs are still not allowed to open. The COVID-19 pandemic is threatening the livelihoods of many Ghanaian youth employed within the hospitality industry.
We are not generating any revenue for us to be able to pay our partners, our suppliers, even salaries enough and stuff like that. So it's been a big issue.
Ghana has not flattened the curve on its COVID-19 infections, but the government says it had to ease the lockdown restrictions to reduce its impact on the economy. But some sectors have yet to bounce back.
The throbbing heart of Accra's nightlife along Osu Oxford Street behind me would normally be buzzing on a Friday night. But with the closure of bars and pubs due to the coronavirus pandemic, this area is now very quiet.
And those within the hospitality industry are finding it difficult adjusting to these tough times.
Over 280 bartenders are currently in an association. Most of them have been laid off with no pay. And most of them are working in these big industries and big hotels. I believe they should have also given us the opportunity to operate with a laid-down procedure, with a social distancing, and also put in measures that might also not spread the disease.
Experts say business owners may have to make some critical decisions, as it's uncertain when the pandemic will be over.
Some businesses may not survive. Others who will survive will have to take a hard decision as to having a frank conversation with their staff. Do we continue to pay you at the levels that were set for you, or we reduce it to cover and elicit cost savings and maintain our business so that we can survive post-COVID enough to guarantee you a job? So there's got to be some sacrifices made on both parts.
These bartenders are afraid of losing their jobs and want the government to consider relaxing restrictions on their business. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And still to come here on Africa Live. Nollywood is back in the game weeks after a nationwide lockdown in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria's film industry is creeping back to work weeks after the coronavirus lockdown thwarted production schedules. Nollywood, as it's well known around the globe, churns out movies and TV shows at a rate second only to India's Bollywood. However, as CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now reports, dwindling revenues and social distancing rules are leading to cuts in cast and crew.
The cameras are rolling again on the set of the popular series Halita, as Nigeria restarts its entertainment industry after the COVID-19 lockdown. The suspense-filled story on social issues, trafficking and justice has garnered viewers across Africa. For lead actor Mofe Duncan, it's a delight to be back at work.
The fact that I'm back on set is great because, one thing, it's good to see people. It's good to learn that people survived the virus, or a lot of us who have come back are still alive and are healthy and things like that. Also, it's what I love doing. I love being in front of the camera. I think that a lot of us have suppressed our creativity a lot because we've not been able to express ourselves.
Nollywood is rated the second largest employer in Nigeria, with more than 1 million people working in the industry. The industry produces an average 50 movies weekly, second only to India's Bollywood. But all of that is changing as producers cut back on costs and crews.
Social distancing thing is pretty much the reason why you have to cut down. I give an example. We have a 70-man crew that's been cut down to 12.
Not just that, operations are different now as producers ensure they adhere to other safety guidelines.
We have the temperature reader, where we get to make sure that everybody walking in here is within the compliant temperature.
Nollywood movies have gained even more global traction, featuring on digital platforms like Netflix. The industry generates an average $590 million annually. That represents 0.21% of the country's GDP. Many worry that future gains could be hampered by the coronavirus outbreak. But this could also be an opportunity, forcing industry players to innovate when it comes to producing content. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's check in on what's coming up on Africa Live Sports. Top-tier football in Tanzania is set to resume Saturday after an 8-week hiatus.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Well, we start in East Africa, where after months without football, Tanzania is set to resume its local football league. Young Africans Football Club, the record league champions, are currently third on 51 points and will be targeting maximum points from the remaining 11 matches as they hunt down leaders and arch-rivals Simba Sports Club. CGTN's Isaac Lucando reports from Dar es Salaam.
Young Africans Football Club, or Yanga, has resumed training. It is taking precautions as it gears up for its remaining matches in Tanzania's Premier League. The coach is already working on ways to end the season on a high.
Generally, the players are good. They're doing well. Based on the performance I've seen, we need to work with the strikers to be able to use the opportunities we get.
The government had stopped sporting activity for 8 weeks due to the coronavirus pandemic. With things slowly returning to normal, the team is taking part in 3 friendly matches to get back in shape. Players are happy with the progress made.
So far, so good. So far, so good. The practice sessions are going well. We are trying our best. You know, staying for 2 months without practicing together is not easy. But if you look at the improvement from the first day of practice, I can say the progress is good.
Hopes of Yanga winning the Tanzania Premier League appear to be dashed. Arch-rivals Simba enjoy a healthy lead and stand a better chance of lifting the trophy. The winner will represent Tanzania in the CAF Confederations Cup next season.
Yanga are hard at work. While chances of winning the Premier League may be slim, the team is hoping that their efforts prove that they are still a force to be reckoned with in Tanzanian football, paving the way for success in the future.
Jitu Waziri has been a die-hard Yanga fan for more than 30 years. He believes that time spent without training may have an effect on his team's performance. To him, lowering expectations is the right thing to do.
We shouldn't be in a hurry, because football doesn't require haste. Football requires preparation. So I think that this coach wants to use these 3 matches as trials to observe the performance of the players and see what to do.
As training continues, Yanga is looking ahead. They are hoping that the optimism and hard work will enable them to reach their goals this season. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
To athletics now, where South African 400 meters world record holder Wade van Niekerk has spoken out about his injury trauma and says he is 100% ready to return to action when the coronavirus pandemic lockdown lifts. The 27-year-old, who has been out with a knee injury since 2017, added he was itching to get back on the track. Speaking to the Wanda Diamond League call room webisode, Olympic champion Van Niekerk says his breakthrough performance at the Paris Diamond League in 2015 kick-started a long-standing battle with Botswana's Isaac Makwala to be crowned King of Africa.
I was so focused on the whole LaShawn Merritt and Kirani James thing that I didn't know that there's someone else coming through with me. And the crazy thing was he's basically my neighbor because he's from Botswana and I'm from South Africa. And then it started becoming like personal. It started becoming like a bit of a rival. It was like, yo, I need to be the king of my area. I want to be the king of Africa. And then it sparked up a bit of a competitiveness where now I want to be like, yo, I need to be the king of Africa before I can be the king of the world.
Elsewhere, Norway's Karsten Warholm set a new world record in the men's 300 meters hurdles at the